This afternoon I've been doing some compound cutting and I thought I'd make a quick video of it. So first off, what is compound cutting? Well, compound cutting is cutting through two sides of a block of wood that are at 90 degrees to one another. So the pattern that we use is placed on the block of wood over a corner. It pays to spend a little bit of time just making sure that that corner is nice and sharp and it's in the right line. And then you've got one face that you're going to cut, and when you've finished cutting that face, you're going to flip the block 90 degrees and you're going to cut the face that's at 90 degrees. What I'm going to be doing this afternoon is actually trying to produce an item that is to some extent or another three-dimensional off the scroll saw. I have an example here. In fact, this is an earlier example of what I'm going to be cutting this afternoon. And what I've got here is a saxophone that was cut first of all in plan view and then in silhouette view, and between them we've got something that looks possibly like a trombone. I beg your pardon, a saxophone. So how do we go about that? Well, first of all, we want a block of wood that is, to all intents and purposes, completely square all around its faces. Now, I was quite fortunate. What I've got here are offcuts from stair spindles. They're about 41 millimeters on a face, so round about 1 5/8 of an inch. And they are at 90 degrees and square. Now, if you cut your own timber and it's a degree or two out of 90 degrees, it's not really going to have a huge effect on the end result. Just try and get it as close to 90 as you possibly can. Now, the kind of wood you use is going to have an impact as well. This is mahogany, which, while it's quite a close-grained wood, is very nice to work with, cuts quite smoothly, produces the most insidious fine red dust you can imagine. So by all means, please wear a face mask while you're cutting it. So here's the blank that I'm ready to cut. You'll see that it's one of the stair spindles. I've put some yellow painter's tape over the wood for two reasons. Firstly, because I sprayed contact adhesive onto the pattern, and if I stick contact adhesive down onto the face of the wood, then the wood is quite gummy, where if I stick it down onto the yellow painter's tape, when I peel the painter's tape off, the wood has no gummy residue to worry about. The other reason, of course, is because using something like this on the wood allows the blade to be lubricated by the adhesive and keeps the temperature down. That's particularly of concern when you're working with oak, because the blade can overheat quite quickly with oak. Right, and as you'll see, I've got my saxophone pattern, I've got the plan view on this side, and I've got the silhouette view on this side. So I'm going to start with that one. You'll notice that what I've done is I've drilled a hole right through the block so that I've got somewhere to start my blade. So shall we get cutting and see how we do? All right, so the first thing I would say for compound cutting is this. It's very important that you have a good way of keeping hold of your block. Usually that means you need a frame, which is what we call this, and the way we use the frame is simply by dropping the block of wood that we have to cut into the frame, like so, making sure that the block of wood and the frame are both flat down on the table, and then tightening up a bit, just so that we're holding the block firmly in the frame. The advantage of that is that you can now use your hands quite far apart to steer through the cuts. You're not limited to try and hold on to the block with your hands really close to the top blade clamp. And as you see, it's really not difficult at all to make. I've got two pieces of wood, both with holes drilled centrally for a 6mm threaded rod. On this side, I've got some threaded inserts that are fitted into the wood, and on this side, I've got a washer, a nut and a wing nut, the two of them having been crushed together. The second thing to bear in mind is that if you have internal areas in your pattern, which you can have, you're going to need to drill through those to cut your internal cuts. If you're using very small drill bits, be aware that they can wander in a thick piece of wood like this and come out at the bottom very far away from where you'd hoped they would come, and in fact sometimes can come right out of the area you were going to cut away, thus marring your piece. So what I do is I start with the drill bit just about half an inch out of the chuck and drill in at that depth, which will reduce the amount of deviation possible for the bit. Then I extend it to about 1.5 inches, and then maybe even one more before I go all the way through the piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed the blade through the hole I made in the wood. Lower the top arm. Now, one of the immediate effects of compound cutting on a block of wood like this is that you're almost certainly going to be cutting through a much greater thickness of wood than you used to. For myself, I tend to do 1/4 inch wood, 1/2 inch. I may occasionally do 3/4 inch thick wood, but here we've got 1 5/8 of an inch, so it's really thick. The first effect of that is that the blade clamp is quite close to the top of the surface of the wood. So what I do is I just take the bottom arm and push it up so that the scroll saw's at the top of its oscillation, which just gives me a little bit more room to be able to take the blade and give it a firm pull upwards as I tighten it. And I tighten it quite hard too. The thicker the wood, the higher the tension you want from your blade. So this blade, you see, is really tight. The reason for that is because, again, it's quite possible for the blade to wander in the wood and not cut directly vertically. So loads of tension on your blade. Make sure your blade clamps can hold your blade nice and tight, because if they work loose you will snap your blade. Blades are cheap. Don't waste your time and energy worrying about trying to cut with a blade that's been slightly blunted. Now, the other thing with compound cutting, because of the greater depth of the wood, you need a lot more speed. I've got my speed on the EX21 set to around about 1200 RPM. Because I'm old and my eyes don't work very well, I also have a magnifying light. Just set the blower tube where we'd like it to be, and off we go. I'm using Pegasus blades because they're the easiest to get hold of here in the UK. I get them from Axminster, who have a store just down the road from me. And you may have noticed how slowly I was feeding the wood, and you'll notice all the way through the rest of this that I'm going to be feeding the wood really slowly because I've got such a thickness of wood that I absolutely need the teeth to work at their own pace. Clear the dust, which is one of the big things with mahogany. One of the things that can gum the teeth is a lot of dust trapped in the cut. So you really want to take it nice and slow and just let the blade do its work. Right, let's carry on. Because the wood is so thick, you really have to watch your finger under the blade clamp, because even just leaving my finger there, I can feel the top of the bottom of the butterfly sort of tickling my nail. If I lifted my finger a bit, I'd get a good whack. Just one more thing to show you before we finish this cut is that the blade is extremely flexible. You can see as I push on the blade, it's flexing left and right. Now, if you keep pushing on the blade while it's running, it's going to deflect inside the cut. And so at the bottom of the block, you're not going to get what you cut at the top. You're going to get something very different. So another reason for taking the cut really slow is you don't want to be putting a lot of pressure on the blade and deflecting it away from vertical. So once we've finished the first side, we're going to swap the block around in the clamp, flip it 90 degrees, just loosen off the wing nuts, rotate it 90 and lock it in again. Now, when you start making the cuts on the second side, you're going to start having pieces coming loose on the first side. So what a lot of people recommend is that you wrap clear tape around the block at this point, just to keep everything together. And again, you'll notice that every time I rethread the blade, I lift the bottom arm just to give me the biggest gap possible here, so that I can get really good hold of the blade, pull it up nice and tight, and make sure that I've got really good tension here. Very important. Without that, you get a lot of blade wander. So really good tension and really nice clamping force on the top. If you find your blade works its way out of your clamps, you're probably going to have to fix that before you can try compound cutting in hardwoods. Right, let's get the second half done. Something else you may notice is that you can turn the wood around the blade just as easily on thick wood as on thin. The only caveat is that you have to just do it a little bit more slowly, so that the blade can basically cut its way around through its turn. And in fact, you can do a pretty much 180-degree turn without any problem, as again, as I say, as long as you do it slowly. Right, so that's that done on both sides. Now again, because of the pattern that I'm using, I need to run a cut just across the top here, so that all the pieces can fall outward from the center. You may not have to do that depending on what pattern you use, but the key is, if you can't pull the block apart when you finish cutting, don't force it. Find a way to cut through the pieces that are holding it in place. So we're just going to run a cut across the top. And there we have our saxophone cut. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that compound cutting is not perfect. Because we had to cut the mouth of the horn on the sax for the front of it, and because of the nature of compound cutting, we've landed up with a horn-shaped bulge on the back pipe of the instrument. So we're going to need to do some judicious sanding to get rid of that. and make it more sax-like. Let's take that back to the bench and see some of the other pieces that I've cut. So you'll see I've got a saxophone in oak as well. The queen of my chess set is actually a Telecaster guitar alike, and you'll see that it gives quite a good likeness. Obviously it lacks a little bit of detail around the tuning machines. The king is the double bass. These patterns are glued on because I am needing to add a little more detail to them, but I'll peel them off for this, and you see the double bass. We actually get an extraordinarily nice instrument out of a compound cut. Really pretty indeed. Particularly love the little scroll at the top and the nice big tuning machines up at the top. So really nice. The saxophone is going to be the knight of my chess set. The castle is the tuba. The other thing to notice is that because we had to cut the flare for the horn of the tuba, our back pipe on the tuba has also got corresponding flare, which we're going to have to sand away. But again, that's a function of compound cutting. The pawn is a little 16th note. I've always thought a whole row of 16th notes looks a bit like an army marching across the page, so they're going to become the foot soldiers of our chess sets. And just because they're chess pieces, I've drilled out the bottom so I can put some lead shot in there just to give them a bit of weight. There you go. I hope you found that interesting. I'm hoping to be able to offer my music chess set patterns on my Etsy page soon. I will put something up on my Facebook and Instagram pages when I manage to get them listed. Thanks for watching.